There is a moment when you notice that certain people react to you differently, even when you have done nothing outwardly unusual. It is not dramatic. It is not confrontational. It happens quietly, in the space between words. Someone becomes tense when you are calm. Someone grows defensive when you remain neutral. Someone begins explaining themselves when you have not asked for clarity. You notice the shift before it is acknowledged. At first, you assume it is coincidence. You assume you are misreading the situation. You assume the discomfort belongs to something else. But the pattern repeats. It appears in conversations where nothing confrontational has been said, in rooms where you have taken up very little space, in interactions where you are listening more than speaking. You are present but not reactive, attentive but not impressed, engaged but not absorbed. That combination unsettles certain people. They are accustomed to emotional responses that move outward. They expect reaction, validation, agreement, or opposition. They rely on feedback to orient themselves. What they encounter in you is something quieter. You observe instead of responding immediately. You register tone, timing, and contradiction. You notice when words and presence do not align. You do not point this out. You do not correct it. You simply remain steady. That steadiness changes the atmosphere. Some people relax around it. Others become increasingly restless. You see it in their posture, in the way their voice sharpens slightly, in how they begin to fill silence with unnecessary detail. You are not withdrawing. You are not withholding. You are containing. You have always related to emotion this way, not as something that demands expression, but as information that requires sorting. You feel before you respond. You sense before you decide. You allow internal movement to settle before giving it form. This has never felt like effort to you. It has always felt natural. But to someone who depends on emotional exchange to maintain a sense of control, it feels unfamiliar. They look for cues in your face. They listen for reassurance in your tone. They wait for you to mirror what they are projecting. You give them none of it. Not because you are withholding empathy, because you are not merging. You remain yourself. That is often where the tension begins. They speak more, they embellish, they test reactions. You notice the testing. You do not react to it. Your attention does not sharpen or soften in response. Your presence does not shift to accommodate their need to be affirmed. You stay consistent. Consistency is difficult for someone who relies on emotional leverage. They are used to influencing the room by amplifying intensity. They are used to pulling reactions out of others. They are used to being felt. You feel them without being pulled. That difference is subtle, but it matters. You register how they attempt to assert dominance through storytelling, how they position themselves as misunderstood, exceptional, or aggrieved, how they glance toward you after making a point, waiting for confirmation. You give none, not deliberately, simply because confirmation is not something you offer automatically. You are listening, not aligning. This creates a gap. In that gap, something becomes visible. They become more animated, more insistent, more emotionally exposed. You see it happen in real time. They speak faster. Their tone fluctuates. Their narrative begins to wobble. You are not challenging them. You are not questioning their version of events. You are simply not reinforcing it. For someone who depends on reinforcement to maintain coherence, this feels threatening. You are not impressed. You are not intimidated. You are not persuaded. You are present. Presence without absorption reveals structure. You notice how their emotional state depends on your reaction, how their confidence rises or falls based on perceived influence, how quickly composure erodes when control is not mirrored back. This is not something you analyze consciously in the moment. You simply register it. You have always registered things this way. As a child, you notice when adults change their tone without changing their words. You notice when kindness had an edge. You notice when praise carried expectation. You learned early that not everyone wants to be seen clearly. Some people want reflection. Some want admiration. Some want submission. You learned to stay still. Stillness allowed you to see what was actually happening. As you grew older, this stillness became refined. It became discernment. You no longer react to emotional displays at face value. You sense what is driving them. You notice what is being protected. This does not make you cold. It makes you precise. Precision is unsettling to people who rely on ambiguity. They prefer emotional fog. They prefer reactions that can be shaped. They prefer others who are easily pulled into narrative. You are not. You do not collapse into their emotional framing. You do not adopt their urgency. You do not take responsibility for stabilizing their inner state. You remain separate. That separation is not distance. It is differentiation. Differentiation exposes dynamics that otherwise remain hidden. They begin to feel watched, even though you are not scrutinizing them. They feel seen, even though you have not said a word. What they are responding to is not your judgment. It is your clarity. Clarity does not argue. It does not accuse. It does not explain. It simply remains intact. For someone who relies on control, intact presence is destabilizing. They cannot read you the way they read others. They cannot predict your response. They cannot pull you into rhythm with them. This unpredictability makes them uneasy. They may attempt to provoke emotion. They may exaggerate. They may shift tone suddenly. You notice the shift. You do not follow it. You stay anchored. Anchoring is often misinterpreted. People may say you are distant. They may say you are reserved. They may say you are hard to read. None of those descriptions reach the center of what is happening. You are not disengaged. You are integrated. You are aware of your internal state. You are aware of the emotional field around you. You are aware of the interaction itself. You are not lost in it. This is what makes certain people feel exposed around you. They sense that their usual strategies are visible. They feel their emotional leverage weakening. They realize, often unconsciously, that they are not in control of the exchange. This realization produces discomfort. Discomfort seeks relief. They may attempt to reassert dominance. They may subtly devalue you. They may withdraw suddenly. You observe this too. You do not pursue. You do not correct. You do not chase understanding. You allow the interaction to reveal itself. This is where many people misunderstand you. They assume your calm is indifference. They assume your silence is passivity. They assume your lack of reaction means lack of awareness. The opposite is true. You are aware enough not to react. You understand that reacting would collapse the clarity you are maintaining. You understand that engaging emotionally would shift the balance back into familiar patterns. You choose not to. This choice is not strategic in the way others mean strategy. It is structural. It comes from an internal organization that does not depend on external validation. You do not need to dominate the room. You do not need to be admired. You do not need to be mirrored. You need coherence. And coherence, when held steadily, has an effect. It reveals where others are fragmented. That revelation is uncomfortable for those who rely on fragmentation to maintain control. They feel exposed not because you uncover them, but because you do not join them. You have noticed that the exposure they feel is not about something you say. It happens even when you say very little. It happens because you do not rush to orient yourself around them. You do not adjust your internal state to match theirs. You do not hurry to reassure. You do not take responsibility for their comfort. This is unfamiliar territory for someone who is accustomed to shaping interactions through emotional force. They expect others to respond quickly. They expect alignment, resistance, admiration, or appeasement. They expect movement. What they encounter in you is stillness. Stillness does not give them anything to work with. They cannot pull reassurance from it. They cannot provoke reaction from it. They cannot stabilize themselves through it. So they begin to feel unstable. This instability is subtle at first. It shows up as impatience, as over-explanation, as a need to restate their point. You notice how often they circle back to themselves, how frequently they redirect the focus, how little space they leave once they begin to feel uncertain. You do not interrupt, you do not compete for attention, you allow the pattern to unfold. Patterns reveal themselves when they are not resisted. They begin to test boundaries without naming them. They make statements designed to provoke agreement. They introduce emotionally charged material unexpectedly. You register each attempt. You do not absorb it. Absorption would blur your clarity. You have learned the cost of that, so you stay contained. Containment does not mean suppression. It means awareness without diffusion. You are present with what is happening, but you are not pulled inside it. This is where the exposure deepens. They sense that their emotional output is not landing the way it usually does. They feel their usual leverage slipping. They begin to feel seen without being validated. That sensation is deeply uncomfortable for someone whose sense of self depends on control of perception. They want to be admired, feared, pitied, or needed. They do not want to be simply observed. Observation removes the illusion of dominance. You do not confront the illusion. You simply do not participate in it. This non-participation is what changes the dynamic. They may escalate, their tone sharpens, their stories become more dramatic, their emotional displays become more pronounced. You notice how their composure depends on your reaction. You remain neutral. Neutrality is not emptiness. It is balance. Balance reflects imbalance without amplifying it. They begin to feel exposed because their inner state is no longer masked by mutual emotional engagement. You are not feeding the dynamic. You are allowing it to stand on its own. This is something you have learned to do over time. You did not always have this level of containment. There were moments earlier in your life when you absorbed too much, when you tried to stabilize others at your own expense, when you confused empathy with responsibility. You learned by feeling what happens when your boundaries dissolve. You learned by recognizing how easily your sensitivity could be exploited. You learned by noticing how certain people became calmer only when you became depleted. You stopped doing that. Not abruptly, gradually. You began to notice the difference between genuine connection and emotional extraction. Genuine connection does not require you to abandon yourself. It does not require urgency. It does not require constant reassurance. It allows space. The people who feel exposed around you are often those who cannot tolerate space. Space invites reflection. Reflection threatens control. You are comfortable with reflection. You live inside it. You spend time understanding your internal responses before expressing them. You notice your impulses without immediately acting on them. You integrate emotion rather than discharging it. This internal integration is what gives you stability. It also makes you difficult to manipulate. Manipulation depends on reaction. It depends on emotional hooks. It depends on predictability. You offer none of those things. You are not reactive. You are responsive, but on your own timeline. That timeline does not serve someone who wants immediate influence. They may accuse you of being distant. They may suggest you are withholding. They may imply superiority or detachment. These accusations are not about you. They are attempts to restore control. You notice this. You do not defend yourself. Defense would re-enter the dynamic. Defense would grant their framing importance. You remain steady. Steadiness communicates something without words. It communicates that you are not available for emotional coercion, that you are not confused by intensity, that you are not intimidated by display. This communication is deeply unsettling to someone who relies on dominance to feel secure. They begin to feel transparent, not because you expose them deliberately, but because they cannot hide behind reaction. You see their insecurity surface. It appears as anger, as contempt, as sudden withdrawal. You do not take this personally. You understand what is happening. You understand that your presence disrupts their usual patterns. You are not threatening them actively. You are threatening the structure they rely on. That structure requires others to be less aware, more reactive, more emotionally available without boundaries. You are not that. You are aware. You are regulated. You are internally organized. This organization is quiet. It does not announce itself, but it is felt. They feel it as exposure. You feel it as alignment. You are aligned with your own inner state. You are aligned with your values. You are aligned with your boundaries. This alignment means you do not need to perform empathy. You do not need to display emotion to prove sincerity. You do not need to engage in emotional theatrics. You care, but you care cleanly. Clean care does not entangle. It does not overwhelm. It does not blur lines. It remains intact. This intactness is what some people cannot tolerate. They are accustomed to blurred lines, to emotional confusion, to dynamics where roles shift and boundaries collapse. Your presence clarifies. Clarification exposes. They begin to sense that you see through surface narratives, that you are aware of power dynamics even when they are unspoken, that you are not dazzled by confidence or authority. You are not impressed by performance. You are oriented toward substance. This orientation makes it difficult for them to maintain illusion. Illusion requires participation. You do not participate. You observe. Observation is not passive. It is active awareness. You are engaged without being entangled. This distinction matters. It is the reason you do not escalate conflict. It is the reason you do not absorb blame. It is the reason you do not collapse under emotional pressure. You are self-aware. That awareness is internal. It does not need to be proven. It simply exists. And that existence changes the field. People who are grounded feel calmer around you. People who are fragmented feel exposed. You do not choose this effect. You do not seek it. It happens because of how you are structured inside. You have integrated what others externalize. You process emotion internally rather than projecting it outward. You regulate yourself rather than controlling others. You maintain coherence rather than chasing dominance. This is why certain people lose their footing around you. They are accustomed to environments where emotional volatility creates control. Your steadiness removes that leverage. They may feel invisible. They may feel powerless. They may feel seen in a way they did not consent to. You do not pursue resolution. You allow distance if it emerges. Distance is not failure for you. It is information. It tells you where alignment exists and where it does not. You are no longer invested in forcing connection. You are invested in maintaining integrity. Integrity does not argue. It does not explain itself. It does not demand recognition. It simply remains consistent. This consistency is what ultimately reveals the contrast between those who relate through awareness and those who relate through control. You are not superior. You are integrated. That integration is the difference. Over time, you begin to trust what you are noticing, not because you want to be right, but because the same patterns keep appearing. You notice how certain people grow uneasy when they cannot locate themselves through you, when your presence does not orient around their needs, when your attention does not bend toward their emotional gravity. They begin to speak as if they are performing. They emphasize details that do not require emphasis. They frame themselves carefully, as though anticipating judgment that has not been offered. You are not evaluating them. You are simply present. Presence without submission is rare. Most people either withdraw or comply. They either disengage or mirror. They either disappear or merge. You do neither. You stay, but you stay intact. This intactness is what creates the exposure. They sense that you are not absorbed into their emotional field. They feel that their influence stops at your boundary. They realize, often without conscious awareness, that they cannot shape your internal state. This realization unsettles them. For someone who organizes their sense of self around impact, this feels like erasure. If they cannot be felt, admired, opposed, or needed, they struggle to locate themselves. You are not withholding recognition. You are simply not offering yourself as a mirror. Mirrors are powerful. They confirm identity. They stabilize self-image. You do not reflect automatically. You reflect selectively. You offer recognition when it is grounded. You offer empathy when it is mutual. You offer closeness when it is safe. This selectivity is often misunderstood. People who expect immediate emotional access interpret it as rejection. People who rely on influence interpret it as defiance. People who depend on control interpret it as threat. You are not trying to threaten anyone. You are simply not available for unconscious dynamics. You have learned to sense when an interaction is about connection and when it is about control. You feel the difference in your body. You notice it as tension, as narrowing, as a subtle internal contraction. When you feel that contraction, you do not push through it. You pause. Pausing interrupts patterns. Those who rely on momentum feel destabilized. When momentum breaks, they begin to fill the space. You allow them to. The more they fill it, the more visible the structure becomes. They reveal their need to be centered, their discomfort with neutrality, their reliance on emotional dominance. You do not point this out, you do not label it, you simply register it. Registration is your strength. You register what others overlook. You register timing, tone, inconsistency. You register emotional subtext before it surfaces as behavior. This has always been true. Even before you understood it consciously, you felt it. You felt when praise carried expectation, when attention came with strings, when closeness required performance. You adapted by becoming inwardly organized. You learned to contain rather than discharge, to integrate rather than react, to observe rather than absorb. This internal organization is what now shapes your presence. It is also what exposes those who lack it. They feel uncontained next to you, not because you contain them, but because you are not fragmented. Fragmentation depends on shared confusion. It thrives in emotional noise. It hides inside urgency and intensity. Your calm interrupts that. You are not calm because you feel nothing. You are calm because you feel clearly. You know what belongs to you and what does not. You know when emotion is yours to process, and when it is being projected toward you, you do not take what is not yours. This refusal creates friction. They may accuse you of being cold. They may imply you lack empathy. They may suggest you are disconnected. These accusations are attempts to pull you back into familiar roles. caretaker, reactor, mirror. You no longer occupy those roles automatically. You choose consciously. Choice removes leverage. Leverage requires predictability. They cannot predict you, not because you are erratic, but because you are not reactive. You respond from integration, not impulse. This makes you difficult to influence emotionally. Influence requires access. You do not grant access without awareness. This is the point where the dynamic shifts. They begin to feel exposed because they realize something important. They realize you are not inside the same emotional contract. You are not agreeing to stabilize them. You are not agreeing to admire them. You are not agreeing to absorb their projections. You are simply present as yourself. This presence is self-aware. Self-awareness is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not assert superiority. It does not need recognition. It simply maintains internal coherence. This coherence reflects instability without amplifying it. They feel that reflection. They may feel seen in a way that bypasses their defenses. They may feel transparent. They may feel small, not because you diminish them, but because their usual structures no longer hold. You do not rush to repair this discomfort. Repairing it would require you to step out of alignment. You do not do that anymore. You have learned that alignment matters more than approval. Approval is temporary. Alignment is sustaining. You have also learned that not everyone wants to be met at this level. Some people prefer dynamics where roles are clear and power is uneven. They prefer emotional systems where intensity substitutes for intimacy. You do not participate in those systems. Your presence quietly dissolves them. This dissolution feels like exposure. They may retreat, they may lash out, they may attempt to reassert dominance in subtle ways. You do not escalate, you simply step back. Stepping back is not avoidance for you, it is discernment. You step back when clarity is threatened. You step back when coherence is compromised. You step back when engagement would require self-abandonment. This stepping back often confirms their fear. They interpret it as rejection, as judgment, as superiority. It is none of those things. It is self-respect. You are not here to manage other people's internal states. You are not here to stabilize fragile structures. You are not here to be consumed by emotional chaos. You are here to remain whole. Wholeness has an effect. It exposes what is not whole, not aggressively, not intentionally, simply by contrast.